my fellow Americans, and to everyone watching carefully around the globe, I need you to pause and listen to what I am about to share with you today. In times of war, the greatest danger we face is not always the enemy across the ocean. Sometimes, the greatest danger is the comforting illusion of our own absolute victory. We are currently being sold a narrative of total success in the Middle East, but the unvarnished reality on the ground, or rather, beneath the ground, is telling a profoundly different and deeply alarming story. Let us establish the exact timeline of events, because the sequence here is absolutely critical. Somewhere in the sprawling Iranian province of Isfahan right now, there is a tunnel. 7 days ago, the entrance to that specific tunnel was completely blocked. American and Israeli fighter jets had just spent 46 grueling days systematically hunting and striking the entrances to Iran's deeply buried underground missile facilities. Our pilots dropped massive, precision-guided munitions, deliberately piling tons of earth and debris into those openings, filling them with impenetrable rubble, desperately trying to trap everything lethal inside the mountains. And for a brief moment, it appeared that the strategy worked perfectly. The United States and Israel successfully struck an estimated 77% of all visible tunnel entrances connected to Iran's infamous missile cities. Armed with this data, on April the 8th, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth stood confidently at a podium in Washington and boldly declared that America had completely destroyed Iran's defense industrial base. He told the world that Iran can no longer build missiles, they can no longer build rockets, they can no longer build launchers, and they can no longer build drones. He proudly announced that their factories have been razed to the ground and set back in historic fashion. But satellite images meticulously reviewed by CNN and subsequently published on April the 14th, 2026, tell a story that is completely incompatible with the Secretary's confident words. In high-resolution images taken on April the 10th, which is exactly 2 days after the temporary ceasefire took effect, you can clearly see heavy front-end loaders actively scooping massive piles of rubble away from blocked tunnel entrances near the city of Koma. You can see fleets of dump trucks lined up and waiting in methodical rows. The debris is systematically being removed. The tunnel is being forcefully reopened to the surface. And this terrifying activity is not happening at just one isolated location. The satellite images reveal the exact same coordinated operations happening at a massive missile base south of Tabriz and at multiple other strategic sites scattered across the entire country. The undeniable truth is this: Iran is actively rebuilding its offensive missile capability during the ceasefire window. And my friends, that ceasefire has exactly 7 days left before it expires. This brings us to a fundamental misunderstanding of what we are actually fighting. To comprehend why this is so alarming, and yet entirely expected by military strategists, you must understand what Iran's missile cities actually are. They are not simply primitive concrete bunkers. They are a highly integrated, widely distributed, deeply buried weapon system that the Iranian regime spent decades and billions of dollars constructing. They built them specifically because they fully understood that overwhelming American and Israeli air power would inevitably, eventually destroy their surface-level military infrastructure. The engineering concept is straightforward in principle, but extraordinarily complex in its execution. Over decades, Iran literally carved tunnels hundreds of meters deep into solid mountains and hillsides across the nation. Deep inside these subterranean fortresses, they positioned massive ballistic missile launchers on complex rail systems. These rails allow the launchers to be moved laterally underground, safely loaded with munitions, driven to concealed launch points just inside the tunnel openings, fired into the sky, and then immediately pulled back into the depths of the earth before they can be located and struck by an American follow-up attack. These tunnels are heavily reinforced with layers of steel and concrete. The entrances are masterfully camouflaged and dispersed across rugged terrain that makes precise aerial targeting incredibly difficult. The underground temperature is artificially stabilized, which perfectly preserves the delicate missiles and volatile propellants in conditions that significantly extend their operational life. The entire, massive system was designed with one specific, nightmare scenario in mind. The exact scenario where the surface-level military and industrial infrastructure of Iran is bombed into dust, and the missile cities must operate independently as the regime's final, standing military deterrent. The United States and Israel implicitly understood this brilliant, paranoid design, and we attacked accordingly. Rather than foolishly trying to penetrate the tunnels themselves, which even our GBU, .57 massive ordnance penetrator can merely damage, but not always destroy. At their deepest points, the coalition forces focused entirely on blocking the entrances. If you strike the opening of a tunnel with enough high explosives to collapse the rock face or fill it with debris, the launchers inside cannot physically exit. They cannot drive to their designated firing positions. They cannot reload. They are functionally imprisoned. As I mentioned, the CNN investigation found that 77% of visible tunnel entrances had been successfully struck during the 46 days of the intense air campaign. United States intelligence assessed that roughly half of Iran's actual missile launchers remained perfectly intact after a month of brutal fighting. Many of those surviving launchers were buried deep underground by our strikes on the tunnel entrances. This means the lethal launchers survived, but they were effectively trapped inside the very caves that were supposed to protect them. This was the exact military paradigm that the ceasefire froze in place on April the 8th. Approximately half of Iran's missile launchers were still operational, but they were physically blocked inside their tunnels, completely unable to exit. The surface-level missile production infrastructure, which Secretary Hegseth correctly described as completely destroyed, was in ruins. The above-ground drone factories were razed. The military-industrial capacity that feeds the missile program was, in theory, eliminated. This was the stable, disarmed state that made the political ceasefire viable in Washington. The missile cities were sealed shut. What was inside could not get out, and without the surface factories to produce new weapons, whatever was inside would eventually be depleted if the fighting resumed. That was the hopeful American military calculation on April the 8th. But the satellite images from April the 10th reveal exactly what Iran calculated. A brilliant researcher at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies said something that every American citizen, every Iranian citizen, every global leader, and every financial market analyst desperately needs to hear before April the 21st arrives. He explained that Iran's overall concept of operations for the missile cities was incredibly simple. You eat the first attack, you dig yourself out, and then you launch again. Iran never built these massive tunnels, assuming they would survive American bunker busters indefinitely. They built them absolutely assuming the tunnels would be hit. They built them assuming the entrances would be violently blocked. And they built them assuming that the rubble could eventually be cleared, using the heavy excavation equipment they deliberately pre-positioned for exactly this contingency. The front-end loaders, the dump trucks, the specialized engineering teams, all of it is completely visible in the April the 10th satellite images. At Koma, a front-end loader is aggressively positioned atop debris, blocking a tunnel entrance, while dump trucks wait nearby. The rubble is being scooped out and hauled away. At the base south of Tabriz, heavy equipment is positioned at a blocked tunnel entrance with a long line of dump trucks waiting their turn. The message, written in the language of heavy machinery on a mountainside in central Iran, is direct and unmistakable. The ceasefire is the precise window Iran is using to dig itself back out to fight another day. And while the offensive missile cities are being rapidly reopened, a deeply parallel effort is highly visible at Iran's ultimate defensive prize, its nuclear complex in Isfahan. Satellite imagery thoroughly analyzed by the Washington-based Institute for Science and International Security revealed that Iran has deliberately blocked Isfahan's 3 tunnel entrances with massive earth and BMS fences and piles of rubble of its own construction. Pay close attention, because this is fundamentally different from what American bombs did. Iran is not responding to damage at Isfahan by clearing the entrances. They are actively fortifying them with their own heavy barriers. They are doing this to intentionally delay any potential lightning-fast ground operation by the United States or Israel designed to seize the dangerous stockpile of 60% enriched uranium stored safely inside. 2-meter-wide dirt embankments have been rapidly constructed. Additional, heavy barriers made of unidentified industrial material have been erected. Vehicles are parked at a nearby checkpoint, indicating ongoing intense security activity. At the middle entrance, which was completely empty just a month ago in March, 2 new dirt barriers and fresh fences have suddenly appeared. At the northern entrance, a massive pile of dirt intentionally blocks the main road, with 2 more barriers sealing the bypass road. President Trump confidently posted on Truth Social that Iran's enriched uranium is under very exacting satellite surveillance by the Space Force, and that absolutely nothing has been touched from the date of the attack. But what the satellite images actually show the world is that Iran is making physical access to that highly sensitive material much harder, not easier, during the exact period when diplomacy is supposedly producing conditions for its peaceful removal. I need you to hold both of those vivid images in your mind simultaneously. the offensive missile tunnels being urgently cleared of American-dropped rubble to allow lethal launchers to exit again, and the defensive nuclear complex being heavily fortified with Iranian-constructed barriers to prevent American entry to seize the uranium. These two frantic activities are absolutely not contradictory. They are perfectly complementary. They represent a chillingly coherent Iranian military strategy for the ceasefire period. Boldly restore the conventional military capability that was sealed by the air campaign, heavily harden the nuclear leverage that remains their ultimate bargaining chip, and execute both operations simultaneously. While our diplomats talk politely in Islamabad, and President Trump tells the New York Post that the war is close to over and something could be happening over the next 2 days in Pakistan, the ceasefire is being weaponized against us. A pause that was supposed to create breathing space for diplomacy to produce a permanent peace agreement is simultaneously creating the physical space for Iran to seamlessly reconstitute the very military capabilities that were neutralized by 46 days of our bombing. Sam Lair at the James Martin Center was careful to note that this behavior should have been entirely expected by our commanders. He stated correctly that a ceasefire requires you to accept that your adversary is going to reconstitute some of their military capacity that you just spent a massive amount of time, effort, and American taxpayer money destroying. This is the brutal, standard dilemma of every single ceasefire in every major conflict in human history. You stop fighting to talk. Your adversary utilizes the pause to rebuild, and you sit there and watch it happen, because choosing to attack during a ceasefire instantly ends the ceasefire and returns you to a bloody war. The critical question is whether what gets rebuilt during the pause is significant enough to fundamentally change the military balance of power before diplomacy can produce a binding, verifiable agreement. In Iran's specific case, the answer depends entirely on a terrifying math equation: how fast the tunnels can be cleared, how many operational launchers can successfully exit once the entrances are reopened, how many pristine missiles remain hidden inside the facilities, and whether 6 remaining days of ceasefire before April the 21st provides enough time for that operational capacity to be meaningfully restored to a lethal level. The Royal United Services Institute offered a sober assessment that adds crucial context to this crisis. They noted that while 77% of visible tunnel entrances were struck, Iranian activity at those sites resumed astonishingly quickly. This perfectly matches the timeline visible in the satellite imagery. The ceasefire was proudly announced on April the 8th. The images showing active clearing operations are from April the 10th. That is exactly 2 days later. Iran did not wait. Iran did not hesitate. The very moment the bombs stopped falling from the sky, the front-end loaders started their engines on the ground. This rapid speed is itself a massive intelligence signal. It strongly indicates that the heavy equipment required for this massive excavation operation was pre-staged at or near the missile cities well before the ceasefire was even signed. Iran methodically planned for this exact moment. The clearing operation was not hastily improvised after the ceasefire announcement. It was fully fueled, manned, and waiting to begin on the morning of April the 8th. When Secretary Hegseth declared that Iran can no longer build missiles, he was accurately describing a snapshot of the surface-level industrial infrastructure. He was absolutely correct that the above-ground factories had been destroyed. More than 450 ballistic missile storage facilities were struck. 800 drone storage facilities were eliminated. Major production sites were severely damaged, with experts assessing that the production of short and medium-range ballistic missiles may have been completely halted. 80% of Iran's integrated air defense components, including advanced radars and battery sites, were destroyed. This devastation of the production and storage architecture was real. It was extensive, and our pilots deserve incredible credit for it. But the launchers themselves, the actual physical weapons systems that fire the deadly missiles into the sky, were designed to be safely underground during exactly this kind of devastating attack. United States intelligence confirmed roughly half survived completely intact inside the sealed tunnels. And let me remind you of a basic military fact. Missiles do not need functioning factories to be fired. They need surviving launchers, they need volatile propellant, they need explosive warheads, and they need clear access to the open sky. The tunnels currently being rapidly cleared at Koma and Tabriz are purposefully providing that exact access to the sky. Meanwhile, domestic politics are colliding with international reality. President Trump is telling the press the war is close to over, hinting at a second round of high-stakes talks in Pakistan. Officials within the administration have quietly confirmed they are not keen to resume heavy military operations, particularly with the November midterm elections rapidly approaching and the Iran war already proving broadly unpopular with exhausted American voters. The economic pressure is crushing. Oil hovering above $100 a barrel has aggressively pushed gasoline prices over $4 nationally for the first time since 2022. United States inflation hit 3.3% in March, marking the largest monthly jump in gasoline prices since 1967. These brutal domestic economic pressures create a massive political urgency for the president to reach a deal, an urgency that his seasoned military advisors may not share, given what the satellite images are now vividly showing about Iran's hostile activities during the ceasefire pause. Vice President J.D. Vance told Fox News that the Iranian negotiating team in Islamabad miraculously moved in the American direction on some key issues, and that the ball is now squarely in Iran's court. But the terrifying truth is that the ball Iran is actually playing with in this ceasefire window is made of heavy concrete debris, being scooped rapidly by front-end loaders in a remote Iranian mountain province. And if you want a clear signal of how the rest of the world views this fragile moment, look at Moscow. Russia's sudden withdrawal of the vast majority of its technical staff from Iran's only functioning nuclear power plant at Bushehr adds a deeply ominous dimension to this picture. Russia built Bushehr. Russia generously supplied the nuclear fuel. Russian technicians have reliably maintained it throughout the entirety of the war. The sudden decision to pull most of their personnel out is absolutely not a statement of diplomatic solidarity with the United States. It is a cold, calculated protective measure by a nation that clearly understands the ceasefire is incredibly fragile and simply does not want its own citizens trapped inside Iran when the sky inevitably catches fire again. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps recently issued a public statement asserting that it still possesses unused capabilities and could deploy terrifying new tactics if the conflict deepens. In the context of everything I have just laid out, that is not a political bluff. It is a terrifying inventory disclosure. When analysts ask what those unused capabilities are, given what has been destroyed on the surface, the evidence points directly toward the underground missile launchers that the satellite images definitively show are being prepared for operational access once again. April the 21st is exactly 6 days away. This ceasefire was designed to produce a permanent peace agreement in 2 weeks. Instead, it has produced a failed round of talks, a massive United States naval blockade, a mysterious phone call from Iran's leadership to President Trump, vague hints of a second meeting in Pakistan, and undeniable satellite images of front-end loaders clearing rubble from the dark entrances to Iran's underground missile cities. The brilliant researcher in Islamabad who accurately described the concept of operations for the missile cities did not frame it as a political threat or a moral condemnation. He framed it simply as cold, hard engineering. You eat the first attack, you dig yourself out, and you launch again. My fellow Americans, Iran is currently actively on step 2. Whether they reach step 3 depends entirely on what happens in the next 6 days. The clock is ticking, the earth is moving, and the illusion of total victory is fading into the dust. We must demand that our leaders see the world not as they wish it to be, but exactly as it is. Thank you for listening, and may God bless the United States of America.